Shavua Tova, gute Woche and a gute Hakodesh. Welcome to the Daily Tanya. It is Motzei Shabbos, and it's the Tanya share for the first day of Cheshvan. Let us all have a good Hakodesh and a good winter, a healthy winter, and a good year. So we continue in chapter 25 in Igeret Hakodesh. And in today's lesson, the Alter Rebbe talks about the forces of the exile, in the time of exile, how the evil forces control and rule over the forces of good. We spoke about the godly soul that has the 10 faculties, the 10 attributes that corresponds to the spiritual attributes. And corresponding to that, God also created the forces of evil, the outside forces, the forces that he calls it the 10, they have the 10 crowns, which is corresponding to the 10 attributes in holiness. The difference is that the evil is all for themselves. But while in exile, they are in control and they rule over the Jewish people. And they nourish through them, through the Jewish people. Because ultimately, anything can only sustain, can only survive when it nourishes from the holy side. So that is why during the time of exile you may see the other forces flourish and they gain so much, but ultimately it is to the detriment. Ultimately it is about the transformation, and ultimately the evil will be completely gone. Our job is to bring the holiness into this world and to purify the world and to transform the unholy into holy. And obviously those who oppose Hashem, those will completely be gone. So let's see inside what Alter Rebbe says. Now God created this opposite that. Since the entire dynamic of the holy side of the universe has its counterpart in the other side, the Sitra Achra, the above mentioned 10 spheres of holiness, and likewise the 10 corresponding faculties of the godly soul, each have their unholy counterpart. And in the unholy side, he calls it Yesh Asara Kisri de Misa'avusa. There are 10 crowns of impurity. It's interesting, he calls, when it comes to the Jewish souls, he calls it 10 attributes, 10 spheres. But in the unholy side, he calls them 10 crowns. Crowns symbolizes royalty. Why does he give them such a nice title, 10 crowns? And the answer is because when you have 10 separate crowns, each crown represents their own king that is only interested in themselves. That is why there are 10 different crowns. In holiness and Kedusha, everything is combined, intertwined, and included from one another. And they're united with one another. When in the other side, they're all separate, all for themselves. Those forces are for themselves. And those 10 crowns of impurity is the root of the souls of the unholy side. From these issue the souls of the nations, which are also comprised of the very same 10 levels. Now the exposition of the Sefer Gilgulim on the verse that man rules over man to his detriment is common knowledge. And this common knowledge, as the Alter Rebbe, is the fact that this is the exile of the Shechina within the klippos, within the shells, to give them life, but ultimately it is for their detriment. שסוד גלוס השכינה בתוך הקליפס, לחייסם ולהשליטם עתה בזמן הגלוס. It refers to the mystery of the exile of the Shekhinah in the midst of the clippers in order to animate them and to empower them to rule in the present time of exile. So man rules over man thus means that the evil man of Klippa rules over the sacred man, the holy side of the universe. But ultimately, however, this is temporary dominion of evil. This is to his ultimate detriment, where its underlying intent is that the sparks of holiness that are found within evil be extracted and elevated. Just like when the Jews went down to Egypt. They came out of Egypt. Yes, they were ruled, they were dominated by the Egyptians, they were enslaved. But ultimately they came out and they emptied out Egypt, meaning all the godly sparks, which was in their physical possessions, was emptied out and was elevated into holiness. This is why the nations presently dominate the Jewish people. For the souls of the nations derive from the klippos, in which the Shekhinah is vested in a state of exile, empowering them to rule. Says the Alter Rebbe, to explain this is not the scope of this lesson. It needs a lot of explanation, but this is the truth. Though extensive exposition is required as to how and what is the manner in which the Shekhinah is invested in exile of the Klippas, nevertheless, it is truly so. However, so the Alter Rebbe concludes that even though the evil side nourishes from the holiness, it has the Shekhinah in exile in them, nevertheless, it is not the same as the life and the nourishment that the Jewish people receive. They are receiving from the backside. The Jewish people receive from the innermost side, the closeness, the face-to-face to Hashem. אלא שאף על פי כן אין הקליפס והומוס יונקים ומקבלים חיוס, אלא מהאור הנמשכת להם מבחינת אחריים דקדושה. Despite this, the klippas and the nations receive their nurture and life force only from a reflection extended to them from the hindmost dimensions of holiness. In a manner of one who unwillingly throws something over his shoulder to his enemy. This we explained in chapter 22, that when you want to give something to a friend, you give facing the friend, but sometimes you have to give someone that you don't like. Whether it's a boss that you don't like, you have to give him a birthday present. So you give it behind the back, you try to give it when he's not there. It's not of giving like face to face with love. So the same thing, Hashem needs to animate the world, needs to animate even the other side, but it is not from the inner side of Hashem. And even that, and by way of numerous and intense contractions and screens, until this radiance becomes vested in the materiality of this world. And dispensing wealth and honor and all physical pleasures unto the nations. But it's not the same as when the ones who are close, connected to Hashem, receive from Hashem in an innermost way, in a face-to-face. מה שאין כן ישראל יונקים מבחינת פנים עליונים, כמו שכוסוב יאיר השם פניו אליך. Jews, however, elicit their sustenance from the supernal countenance, the panim or pnimius, the innermost aspect of divinity. As it is written, may God make his countenance shine upon you. Each according to the source of his soul, up to the most elevated of levels. We once gave the metaphor that the Alter Rebbe says elsewhere regarding using a metaphor of a king that makes a feast and invites his closest friend to sit by him and feast with the king by the table, in the royal table. And in the feast they give nice portions, delicious food. But of course in a royal palace there's so much food and there's a lot of leftovers. What do you do with the leftovers? You throw it out to the dogs, to the animals. And the animals have their own feast. And guess what? The animals may have much more food than those who sit by the royal table. But where would you rather be? Would you rather eat the food, the plenty food outside with the animals? Or would you rather sit with the king and feast together with the king? This is what the giving, when Hashem gives Am Yisrael, those are close to Hashem, those are connected to Hashem and fulfilling Hashem's wishes in this world. So this is the end of today's shir, and we shall continue B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow. Shavua Tov and a good Hakodesh.